This is Newell Brian Tozer at the Atlanta History Center, and it's the 16th of March, 2005. And I'm going to interview Mr. James F. Jernigan for the Veterans History Project, World War II veteran. And Mr. Jernigan, you're a native of Atlanta.
Yes, I am.
Born and bred in the Broad Patch.
Born and bred right here.
Okay.
Don't find too many these days.
No, we are an unusual bunch.
Almost a minority.
Yes, you and I, we're very lucky to get together since we're both natives and they're not
Exactly.
natives. But you were born here in Atlanta in 1924?
Exactly. And I have two brothers. One was the first baby at Emory University Hospital, and I was born in the same hospital.
At Emory?
At Emory. And we both went to school there.
All right.
And my younger brother as well.
Went to Emory College?
Yes.
Good. And you were born September the 19th?
September the 19th, 1924.
Have lived most of your life in Atlanta?
All in the Atlanta area, in the Decatur area for a while, but mostly in the metro city limits of Atlanta.
That is rare these days.
That is, yes. I went to the grade school, S. Inman School, and then the boys' high school, Bass Junior High. So that's all part of the neighborhood here.
It's Atlanta history, it really is. You say that you went to Emory to college. Was that before or after World War II?
No, after World War II on the GI Bill.
Really?
And that's what really gave me the boost. It's one of the grandest programs that the government ever invented for the young folks there. And I just wish that I don't know what we're doing today, but I hope they're doing that for other service people, because it was my opportunity
to get an
education. Because when I left boys' high school, the monies weren't available, and I went to work in downtown Atlanta and went to the Georgia Evening School. So I was in the deferred student program until they called that group up in 1943, early 43.
So you were drafted?
Yeah, yes, we were in what was called at the time a student deferment program, and this was the old Georgia Evening School.
Which is now Georgia State
University.
University.
It was on Lucky Street, yeah, and they've since evolved into the great University of Georgia State. Right. But, and that was the beginning of the service career, of course, when I was drafted with Fort McPherson.
And when were you drafted?
And that was in the spring, April 43.
So how old were you? My math.
Well, let's see, 24, and it was 18, I guess.
18.
That was about as young as you could get.
You were 18 years old when you were drafted.
Right.
Whew.
Isn't that something?
Yes, it is.
But I graduated from high school at the age of 16, so I was a pretty mature young fellow. I'd been working in the business world for 2 years and going to evening school. But I got out of high school at an earlier age because I doubled up on classes and so forth.
So you were drafted into the Army.
Yes, and actually because I was working with the AT&T company at the time, it made good sense. They put me in the Signal Corps. Of course, I wouldn't tell them I was a stockman with AT&T. By stock, I mean putting up stock. But I went in first assignment was at Camp Crowder, Missouri.
But you went first to Fort McPherson.
That was just classification. That was just when then they sent us on to Camp Crowder, Missouri.
Right here in Atlanta.
In Atlanta, right, in the Atlanta suburbs, and that was where they drafted us in and then classified us in. And because of having worked with a telephone company, I'm sure that was the reason they put me in the Signal Corps, and that was in Camp Crowder, Missouri, and went through basic training there, which was pretty basic, I guess, for all recruits, and then into the radio, and I qualified as a high-speed radio operator.
Good.
And was doing so well, and I hate to tell the public this, but that I said, now who is the first guy they're going to shoot? And I said, it's a guy with a radio pack that knows how to do all the communication. So I took the Air Force exam as because I really had that in the back of my head, I think, all along, and passed the cadet testing, that it was pre-testing that they do. And so from that, after 3-4 months at Camp Crowder, I was shipped to Miami Beach, Florida, where it was just hundreds and hundreds of cadet trainees that were just called student cadets until they were, you know, further classified.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where the first leg of my
training
started, right?
And when would that have been?
Well, that was later on in 43.
43.
Yes, it was mid-43, and then we were transferred from there. And again, at that time, you see, the ranks had been filled pretty well, the backup ranks for most all of the services. And so they had an excess number, but they were still recruiting into the cadet program. And so we had not really taken the final exam, physical and all that, to get into the Air Force as such, which were pretty high standards. But they sent us to the University of Missouri for 3 months of just, you know, they told us when we arrived there, and we lived in the old fraternity houses.
Oh.
It was just, you know,
That's
that was
in
the space.
Columbia.
There were no, yeah, Columbia, and they had no, very few men on campus, so we were big shots, you know.
Popular with the
yeah,
girls.
popular with the ladies. But we really, in physical training, was very intense. But the training, the classes were just pretty much routine. They weren't worried too much about your grades. They just wanted to get you in good shape before they sent you to the next place. So that Christmas, that was in December of 43, that I was sent to San Antonio, Texas, to be classified further. And it was a huge Air Force, I guess, beginning place where they put us through all kinds of tests as to whether you put your preference, pilot, navigator, or bombardier. Those were 3 classifications. And so I took all the exams, and I put pilot first. You know, everybody wanted to be a hero pilot. And then I'm not sure which second, navigator, and then bombardier. And I did qualify for whatever, and so they gave everybody their first choice at that time. And I'd been sitting around just waiting on, you know, being sent to a place when they called in a whole group of us and said, now fellas, you are better qualified to be navigators than you are pilots because of your testing. And so if you don't want to be a navigator, because the programs are all so full, that you go through that door right over there, and that sergeant will take care. Well, nobody walked through that door. We said, oh, so be it. So we'll be navigators. We're going to navigate. So we were, the next assignment was our basic training in navigation, and that was Ellington Field in Houston, right out of Houston, Texas. So I might say I fought the Battle of Texas because I was there a long time. But shall I go ahead and tell the rest of just the story, just the chronological story of my in-service period, which is not, as I say, very exciting.
Well, you fought the Battle of
But
Texas
I fought the Battle of the United States, but I was just the best trained navigator that you ever saw. Anyway, they after finishing the basic training in navigation in Ellington Field, the program, again, was very, very full. And so they said, okay, fellas, we've got time. We're going to send you down to San Marcos, Texas. That's Harlingen Field, which was right on the very tip. And when I got to Harlingen, Texas, I realized it was below Miami. And I didn't realize that the tip of Texas is that far south. But that's, anyway.
I never realized that either.
And I didn't know it. And it's right on the border of Mexico. And so they had B-24s, and they had all of the training for gunners. So I went through all of the gun, and you'd never seen, it was like in a carnival. You were shooting BBs, and then you shot 50 caliber machine guns, and then things that went around tracks, and the most interesting part of that, I think, they mounted a 4x4 in the back of a pickup truck. And they put a shotgun on that, and you were simulating the position of a waist gunner, shooting out the side. That's called the waist gunner's position. And so you were riding around this track, and then the various ones were put in what they call the house where they throw out those, clay pigeons, and then you would fire out, and you were moving, and the target was moving, and that's what they were, of course, simulating, that you moving and another target moving too, and I don't think I hit a single one of those. And not many other people did either. That was
sounds awful.
But it was really nothing too exciting about that. But they did
give you all this training.
Yes, and then we did go up and the final part of our training was actually air-to-air, shooting the P-39s, carried targets, tow targets, and your bullets were colored, so they would know, in other words, if mine were yellow, then any yellow paint that went through that target, they could count that hit, and then others were red and blue and other various colors. So that was kind of interesting, but it was since that really wasn't our goal, it was kind of a fun time. But I got the gunnery wing, so I was really at least had something. Because if you got washed out of that, you had something, something to fall back on. That's right. So I was already officially a gunner. Then
I guess navigators had to be able to shoot.
Well, that's certainly. I think they tried to train as many as they could. But this again was an interim training. It really was a sort of a stall because they didn't have places to put everybody. They were working through that, and the replacements going to Europe is where the next step would have been. And so by the time when I got through that, I ended up in the advanced navigation training in San Marcos, Texas, which was right out of Austin, Texas, which is capital. And so there's another 3 or 4 months, whatever that was.
In Texas.
And finally we graduated and got our navigation wing. So that was, of course,
and that must have taken, the whole course must have taken about a year.
Yeah, well, I think yes, it would probably, the next step of my career was the most exciting or depressing. And that was, after we got our wings, we had about 4 days to report to our new base where they would make up the crews for the B-24s is what we were assigned to, and that was Mountain Home, Idaho. And so this buddy of mine, he had an old beat up, I think it was a Nash automobile. I don't even remember that much about it, but he lived in Wyoming, Minnesota. So we decided, it was just before Christmas that we had graduated in 44. So we decided to go up. And because, see, Idaho's up here, go through across Montana North Dakota. His was in Minnesota, and go see his folks, say hello, and then head off across to Mountain Home, Idaho, which is right up in the corner of that particular state. Well, we got to his place, had a wonderful meal, and then had to say goodbye the next morning just about, because we were really just en route. But we were furnishing our own transportation. And then we realized the roads through North Dakota were all closed in. Winter had begun to set. It was December, so it was beginning to set in. And so we had to go all the way back down through Omaha, Nebraska. And so going back down, we really were having to drive, and we were driving night and day, taking turns. And one of the slippery spots on the road, we tumbled out into a cornfield.
Oh.
And all I remember was, here we go. And the next thing I heard was this guy hollering, Jeb, where are you? And I looked up, and I'm underneath the car.
Oh, my.
And I said, I'm under here.
Oh.
And he pulled me out from the, can you believe that? No. Pulled me out from underneath, and I stood up. And he says, what's wrong? And I said, well, the left shoulder's busted. I don't know what happened, but, you know, I can't move it. But, and so this little German family with 3 or 4 kids in the back stopped up on the highway. And so we walked up, got in the back of that car. They drove us to this little German community, mostly German community. And this doctor's office was above the grocery store, whatever, you know, just an upstairs, just in a little small town. And so he x-rayed us, and boy, my head felt like it had been cracked, you know, and the arm, of course, was, and he didn't do it, and nothing happened to him. He put his hands up like that. He was driving at the time, and it just rolled. Man, it was a perfect roll.
Your buddy.
And my buddy. And that's when I figured the Lord had something else planned for me to do.
But you survived.
When I survived that without any more injury than I had, and as it turned out, he said, well, the shoulder's separated. No broken bone. The shoulder's separated. But, so we didn't know what to do. We called where we were supposed to report. And they said, go to the nearest Army hospital. And we figured out where it was, and got on the train, and that was about 3 days later. He fed us soup, and he said, I've got a son overseas, and he treated us just like his own boys, I know, and he was just so caring. And he said, well, no brain concussion, although, you know, you had a lick, and only thing we had, I know, a miracle, and the only thing was his shoulder, and it's going to have to be repaired. So we got on it, but on the way walking to the train depot, they had pulled that car into the, you know, shop. And we looked at it, and it was like one of these derby cars you hear bumping. There was not, every glass in the whole thing was broken out. It looked like a tin can twisted in the tiny world. We got out. We were thrown from the car, both of us, obviously. And the thing must have rolled over on top of it on that thing. How'd I get under there otherwise? and to come out that, and the ground was got to have been pretty soft because it was a plowed field, you know, so that was the other lucky part of it, I guess. But anyway, went to that little hospital, and the major there said, well... And
where was that?
And that was in Nebraska, a little German town, but he said, and being a young lieutenant, you know, and so forth, he said, you'll be it's almost Christmas time, the USO and all that, so much nicer in the big hospital in Omaha. Said, with your permission, it's not an emergency that has to be done, it has to be repaired, but they have so much better facilities, and you're going to be, you know, happier there. And so, bless his heart, he drove me to this, drove me to, you know, and maybe he did some work there himself, I don't know, but he took me there, and I think he dismissed, my buddy his back had been wrenched a little bit or something, but not anything to cause him to stay. But he may have gone to, maybe we went together because he was then okay to go, you know, to go on to the next spot. But I was delayed, 3 months. About, and a little funny. In
the hospital?
Yes, in the hospital with his shoulder. And so they said, well, the operation, normally they would take a little ligament out of the leg to tie down that was just the technique they used. Now, I didn't know all this, but they used some steel pins and pinned it together and wrapped it up. And the doctor came and said, all right, son. I said, well, I looked at the x-rays, and it's not the way we want it, so we're going back in and do it again. I said, well, what? I don't think I've got a choice. Thank you. Let's get it right this time. So they fixed it, and 3 months later, well, they had us before a board. One of the fellows had his done the old-fashioned way, I found out, and I'd had mine with these steel pins, and they stuck out of the shoulder, just a little crook on the end. And so they said, raise your arm, and I raised mine, and he got up about that high, and I, you know, was doing all this good exercise in there. they started applauding. And oh my goodness, I said, what's going on? I said, well, this is the first time we've done that.
Oh, you didn't realize that you were the
how long
first
does
time.
it last? And he's, well, we don't know because it's the first one we've done. I said, well, we'll find out. But the worst part of it, as far as pain, was the darn elbow. You had it strapped to your side, you know, and they always worried about it they called it freezing up, you know, if it doesn't move. And apparently they didn't know what they know today because they moved you real quick, you know, today. And so they strapped that thing to me. And, you know, a month later, or half, or 6 weeks later, and it took me almost a month to get the arm straightened out, get back in place. But they didn't do any rehabilitation, you know, didn't have you squeeze things or lift anything. And
didn't have all the techniques.
didn't have any of the rehabilitation techniques. And so this shoulder's always been a little smaller. It just never did. The muscles didn't get rehabilitated like they would today, of course. But that was a delay, and the next thing they did was sent me to Polk Field at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. Polk Field was at Fort Bragg, huge establishment, and was being trained in, well, the war ended in Germany.
45.
So whatever that was.
April
45. Well, anyway, they were in complete control of the situation there. And so they retrained me in a low, what they call Iran, pinpoint navigation. We could drop paratroopers out. So we were trained in a different vehicle, which was a C-46. So we were headed to the West Coast to go to the Pacific, you know. That war was wound down, and so they didn't need replacements there. So I'm out in Blytheville, Arkansas after that training, so I qualified in that. And that was interesting because you had instruments there, and within 100 yards you could drop, you know, the way the navigation equipment worked, you could really pinpoint so the fellas would drop where they were supposed to be dropped.
So you dropped the paratroopers.
Yeah, that's right. And the way they did that, they had these fast flying planes would go in and drop a signal on the ground, and then that sent up a signal, and so the troopers would be sent in, the navigator, you know, zeroed in on that signal, and mostly it was, a lot of the navigation wasn't any signal because they could pick up that signal and know where you were and all that stuff. But anyway, so I'm out in Blytheville, Arkansas, when Truman dropped the bomb.
The atomic bomb.
And so that's where my career ended.
Which was August of 45.
Yeah, there you go, August 45. So I was sent to Maxwell Field, and
Maxwell Field was Alabama.
Alabama, and that's where I was discharged.
Okay.
So it was in 45. That you know, another month or two after that was probably September, October 45 when I was. So I say I was a wonderfully trained navigator.
Lots of
I could
training.
do dead reckoning, I could do celestial navigation, and I could do pinpoint navigation, but never got to use it.
But you were well trained.
I was well trained, and I was doing what I was told to do. And of course, we all, back then, you were anxious to be a part of action, but you did, you know, and that was just the way it was. And so I certainly accepted that as probably a good fortune as far as that goes.
But
so
you got as far as California.
No, it was Blytheville, Arkansas,
Blytheville.
and it was, we were being prepared to be shipped to, you know, to the West Coast and go on to the Pacific for what would have been, without the bomb, just one island after another, and the paratroopers were always the first guys in, you know, and so forth, and so that was what we all had to look forward to. But thank God we did. So when somebody asked me who was your favorite president of the United States, it's always Mr. Truman. He stopped the conflict out there, and that was a deciding thing. And of course, you always have great compassion for those who were recipients of that, but I guess they brought it on themselves, didn't they?
Yes.
As far as that goes.
So in that fall, you were mustered out at Maxwell
Field, right. And I was in such good health, I didn't report any injury. I just wanted to get out. And I was perfectly mobile, so it really went. I've played golf all my life since and hadn't had any trouble. So it really was a wonderful, I mean, apparently they did an awfully good job. And it got, repairing the shoulder, and that they were always trying to find a way to get the person back in action sooner, you know, not to have to be rehabilitated as long and out as long, and that was something that somebody had come up with, and it certainly worked.
You were the first one.
I was, as far as I know, at least in that part of the country, I was the first one. But that was really kind of humorous in the sense when I didn't realize that, you know, what they were doing, but they were proving that this guy is already mobile, you know, and this poor guy could, but I don't know, his was going to last. I knew it was going to last because he had tied it down. And they pulled those pins out. When they,
out of your arm.
Out of the shoulder there, yeah. When I didn't know they were sticking out until they took the bandage off, you know, months later, and they had these two little things off. But anyway,
they finally pulled them out.
Finally pulled them out. But it was.
Well, you had quite a career.
I had quite a career in the States.
Yes, you really did.
But.
And when you came back to Atlanta.
Yes.
What business did you go into?
Well, I was, of course, had completed the sophomore year in college at evening school, so I had the wonderful GI Bill. And so, of course, all of the companies then offered me a job back in the telephone company, and I said, no, I want to go get my degree, so I went to Emory and completed my AB degree there and took another year of law. So. And I spent my career with Sears Roebuck and Company, 38 years.
Wow.
In the Atlanta area the entire time.
How wonderful.
And that's a hometown. That's very,
wonderful.
I was blessed all the way, it really was. But I was very fortunate in getting in an area, the headquarters for the Southern Territory was here. And so I ended up in charge of all the service for the Southern Territory. So I had a real fine career with Sears before.
Big job.
Yes, before it concluded.
Oh.
So.
Well, we are so grateful to you for coming and talking to us and telling us your story, which is very interesting and exciting and important to know.
Well, thank you so much.
Is there anything else you'd like to add?
Well, I can't think of anything, but just that your acquaintances all had stories to tell. And as you hear, my story was pretty mundane. It wasn't anything special, but I was thankful that I was able to come back and have a wonderful family and career here in the Atlanta area.
So you married here?
Yes, and she was a pre-teenager when we first met in our church, and wrote to her during the service. And she was the one that, and when I got back home, she had been the girls' high and say in journalism and in Georgia, and so we were married in my second year at Emory after coming back, and so she kind of helped get me through school. And then the GI Bill ran out, and I went to work. So that's
thank heavens for the GI Bill.
Yes, and that's something that I certainly salute all the people who made that decision.
It was
back
wonderful.
In that day. And in fact, we used the wonderful housing, let's see, I'm trying to, the percentage was 4% to buy our first little house, and we used the GI loan in order to buy my first little house. And so the government, in effect, paid me back in many ways for the services that I had given. So that was another awful nice thing that the people in Congress and thought about doing for those who had served, you know, during that time. So it was, it really was a big boost to me, and that I was able to maybe advance quicker and further because of that experience, right?
Well, it was just appropriate.
It was. It really was.
It's wonderful. Thank you very much, Jim Jernigan,
thank you so much
for coming to talk to us.
It was my pleasure.
Thank you.